So you've watched Joker, you've seen Joaquin Phoenix's incredible performance, and you might be wondering to yourself, what type of psychological diagnosis fit with Arthur Fleck? How might we treat him in psychotherapy? Well, I'll answer all those questions for you, and at the very end of this video, I'll point out a subtle message about mental health that you might have missed while watching Joker. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, I'm Dr. J, and I make videos to raise awareness about mental health, reduce stress and anxiety. If any of that interests you, you can subscribe and follow my channel, but I am so excited about this video. The assessment, diagnosis, and then treatment of Arthur Fleck. Assessment can be an ongoing and sort of subjective thing. So if you're in the mental health field, please comment down below. Let me know your diagnostic impressions. And even if you're not in the mental health field, please comment down below. Let me know what you were seeing and picking up on while you were watching the film. Let's get into the assessment portion. When we're assessing anyone in psychology and we're trying to move towards a diagnosis and treatment, we first just want to notice what are some of the symptoms, emotions, and behaviors that we see from this person. Looking at Arthur, even in this iconic opening scene, we begin to notice some signs of low mood and sort of incongruent affect. And so in that opening scene, you see him pulling his cheeks wide and a tear to begin to ball up under his eye. Again, this is relating to maybe him wanting to feel happy, but internally feeling this low sadness, maybe even depression. But he relates to this feeling of lowness in other scenes as well. In the first therapy scene, he says to his therapist, "I just don't want to feel this bad anymore." And he also says to his mother when she's in the hospital that, "I don't think I've been happy for 1 minute my entire life." Wow, what a powerful statement, but again, alluding to this lowness, this sadness that maybe he's been feeling for a long time. The next major symptom we begin to see from Arthur is maybe one of the most famous ones when you think about the Joker, and that's Arthur is beginning to have these laughing attacks. The hallmark kind of characteristic of these laughing attacks is they are uncontrollable. You can see him struggling and trying to cover his mouth at times to hold back these laughing attacks from happening. But no matter what he does, the laughing attacks kind of run their course. And he's in public sometimes when they happen. He's in places where you wouldn't want to be having them, like on stage, starting his stand-up career. But these laughing attacks seem to be happening when he's having some sort of emotional response, maybe anxiety, stress, anger, but it's clear that you see him having an emotional response to a situation and then having this uncontrollable laughter. Moving on from the laughing attacks, which are definitely causing clinically significant distress in Arthur's life, we now begin to see some psychosis symptoms in the form of delusions and hallucinations. So delusions are these fixed beliefs that people hold on to despite being faced with counter evidence. And so I believe the delusion that best fits Arthur's experience would be called a grandiose delusion. And this type of delusion is when people just believe that they're famous, that they're powerful, that they're beloved. The hardest thing to differentiate when watching Joker is when Arthur is kind of going through these fantasies, like especially when Murray Franklin calls him down from the audience early in the film and he's talking with Murray and Murray goes, "Oh, I wish I had a son like you." Is Arthur just believing that this is a fantasy? Does he know that this really isn't real? Or is Arthur starting to incorporate this delusion in that he is this famous somebody? There's evidence that kind of goes both ways when you watch it. I definitely was getting the gut reaction. I was like, ooh, these are leaning towards delusions. But there's points where he mentions comments where he clearly knows that no one was paying attention to him. Like he wasn't this famous person before. And yet, as he, again, killed the people on the subway train, now he's getting this attention. So you can kind of argue either way, are delusions happening? But the one thing you definitely can't argue is, are hallucinations present? 100% for sure Arthur is having hallucinations. And this is the hallmark kind of scenes with the neighbor, where some of you were thrown for a plot twist. I'm going to be dead honest. I saw that coming a mile away. A lot of things I'll miss in movies that I knew, especially after he murders the people in the subway. And the next scene, besides him dancing again in the bathroom, but the next scene is him running up to the neighbor's door, opening it and kissing her. I immediately felt that was incongruent, and I was like, that was definitely a hallucination. And so as it progresses, you see that all these scenes Arthur is having with the neighbor by his side really aren't there. So he's imagining her there, he's seeing her there, but she's not actually there in reality. The only scenes that we kind of know for sure occurred where he's really interacting with the neighbor is the first one, where he interacts with her in the elevator, and the scene later on where he's in her apartment and she's asking him to leave, asking how he got in there. And then, of course, they do the reveal showing that he was hallucinating all these other experiences. But again, that symptom of psychosis for sure can't be debated. Delusions is kind of iffy, whether he really believes he's this famous person or he's just fantasizing about it. The next bit of symptoms we notice from Arthur are what I'd like to call social oddities or kind of childlike responses. This first kind of childlike response that I noticed through the film was when the coworker hands Arthur the gun at work. Arthur's response was just really childish. He kind of whispers and is kind of laughing. He's like, "We're not supposed to have guns at work." And it wasn't the type of response I would expect from an adult, somebody Arthur's age. It just really felt childlike, which I kind of noted and thought was kind of weird. And then later, they show Arthur sitting in the comedy club, and the comedian is going through all the jokes, and Arthur is laughing at all the wrong times. Like when the whole crowd laughs during the punchline, Arthur is not laughing. And then in kind of the setup of the joke, you'll hear Arthur laugh. And then sort of at other times, you'll hear him laugh. And it's not him having one of those laughing attacks. You can tell he's trying to get it and he's trying to connect, but he's just missing it. And another example in the film where there's sort of this delayed response or kind of missed social cue is when he's interacting the first time with the neighbor in the elevator, and the neighbor's child is kind of going on in the elevator, and the neighbor kind of goes like that to her head. Like Arthur kind of sees that response and waits until she walks far down the hallway and then calls to her and does the response back in a really kind of delayed manner, which shows, again, something not clicking socially. There's one last major bit of symptoms that I noticed while I was watching the movie and assessing Arthur throughout, but I'm sure there's lots of symptoms that I missed. Please comment down below. Let me know what you thought while you were watching the film. But this last cluster of symptoms that I noticed were under the umbrella of angry outbursts that turn into violence as the film progresses. And again, someone might argue that some of these outbursts are in self-defense. Obviously, the three men attacking him on the train, someone could say that was done in self-defense. But when he pursues down the third man who's running for his life and he makes sure he kills him, that felt very different, as if he had snapped. Obviously, when he gets fired from his job, one could say, well, that's sort of congruent because he's upset, but it shows him being unregulated in the alleyway after being fired, punching the garbage cans, kicking the trash. And you kind of start to see him become more and more unregulated as the film progresses, especially when he's back collecting his things from his work kind of locker room and he punches the clock off the wall and he's laughing and making a joke out of it. That felt very different. And then later, of course, when he's outside Wayne Mansion and he's choking the security guard through the fence who said something bad about his mother, showing again that he's not able to tolerate his emotional experience. And then finally, of course, him murdering his mom, his co-worker, his idol Murray. You just see this progression of being more and more unregulated, and that leading to more violence. There are still a lot of other symptoms or behaviors that we can note from Arthur, including suicidality, the fact that he looks very underweight, his social isolation, the nicotine use that might be covering up some anxiety. But let's move on a little bit and think about what diagnoses help explain a lot of what we're seeing from Arthur. Well, the first one we have to start with is traumatic brain injury, or TBI. Arthur is hit over the head a lot in this film. I counted at least 4 times, and it could have been more. He gets cracked over the head with the sign right in the beginning when he's jumped on the train by the 3 men. Thomas Wayne punches him in the face, and at the end he's pulled out of the car in the car crash unconscious. So there's definitely some traumatic brain injuries going on throughout the film, but also there's this scene where he finds the medical record, his history, where he goes to the mental hospital and is trying to get information about his mother, and he learns about his child abuse that he went through. And some of the descriptions of that child abuse are just horrific. But again, there's this history of abuse and trauma that he's going through. Well, we know that repeated head traumas and TBIs can lead to the degenerative brain disease CTE. What are some of the symptoms of CTE? Impulse control problems, impaired judgment, aggression, suicidality, depression, anxiety, confusion. Look at how well these match up to what we see with Arthur. It's pretty incredible. Sticking with neurological conditions, Arthur's repeated uncontrollable laughter is a condition, and it's called pseudobulbar effect. What causes pseudobulbar effect? Strokes, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and TBI. So again, the evidence is mounting that there's some sort of neurological condition going on here for Arthur, and he certainly needs to see a medical doctor, a neurologist, and get some of these symptoms looked at through brain imaging. Outside the neurological realm, thinking about diagnosis, we get pulled into the psychotic disorders because of the possible delusions and definitely the hallucinations. And under the psychotic disorders, we have the classic schizophrenia, brief psychotic disorder, and we have psychotic disorder due to a medical condition. This has to be considered because of everything we just talked about before with the different TBIs and neurological conditions. But the disorder that I get pulled to is schizoaffective disorder. And the reason why is we're seeing the hallucinations with co-occurring mood disturbance, his depression, his very low mood state. For this diagnosis to really fit, we would want to see at least 2-week period of time where he only has the delusions or hallucinations without the mood disturbance. If he's only having the psychotic symptoms with the mood disturbance forever, then we're getting pulled into maybe a bipolar disorder type 2. The reason I don't say type 1 is I don't see any evidence of a manic episode while watching the film. Manic episode would be a highly elevated mood, racing thoughts, constant impulsive behavior, risky behavior, and I see him more as low mood throughout the film. So maybe you could argue hypomanic at some point, that he's in this mild elevated state. I don't really see a lot of evidence of that. I do see evidence of depression. So again, you could argue bipolar type 2 with psychotic features. Of course, because we haven't been tracking Arthur for a long period of time, it's hard to say definitively with any of these diagnoses, but we're just doing the best we can with the information that was presented in the film. Taking that information, we have to consider trauma. And because of the trauma history we witnessed during the film and the history of the trauma that was read, again, when he gets that report from the mental hospital, I'd definitely be considering PTSD. I'm not seeing a lot of symptoms of flashbacks, sleep disturbance, avoiding certain situations that are sort of stereotypical in PTSD, but I certainly would be considering it based on the history. Other things that we have to consider that are impacting his psychological well-being are the environment. On the radio, they're talking about the super rats, the trash everywhere, Gotham falling apart. We have to think about his occupational situation where he just got fired from his job. And of course, his home life where he's caring for his mother. All these situations are impacting his psychological well-being and health. We also have to consider personality disorders. Again, personality disorders you track over the long haul. You have to see onset of these symptoms starting in adolescence or young adulthood. We don't have that information, but the personality disorder I get pulled towards is narcissistic personality disorder because of these fantasies that are grandiose, where he's super powerful. It leans towards narcissistic personality disorder, but again, there's not a ton of other evidence to confirm it. Now let's transition to the therapy and treatment portion, which I am super excited about. Of course, there's so many different types of treatment and psychotherapies you could implement with Arthur, but I'm not going to get into all that. I'm going to stick with the script of the film and pretend that I'm the therapist in the room and talk to you how I would respond. First and foremost, working with Arthur, he's got to be seen as a psychiatrist. We definitely want him on a medication treatment for the psychotic symptoms. Also, based on everything we said, he's got to probably be seen a neurologist. We definitely want him getting fully assessed. Even though something like CTE can't be assessed until someone dies, we definitely want to assess TBI and other neurological conditions. Outside of setting up these other medical partners that are going to help in the care of Arthur, as the therapist in the room, I want to ground myself in validating his experience. Arthur goes through so much invalidation in this film. Almost every single character invalidates him at some point, except for two people. One, the neighbor, which is probably why at times he stalks the neighbor or fantasizes and have these hallucinations about the neighbor. And two, his old coworker, Gary, which he ends up not killing in that one really violent scene. But he also says, Gary, you're the only one that was ever nice to me. So knowing that his whole life he's been so invalidated, I want to just be compassionate and curious about Arthur's experience. And so over time, this is going to offer him a corrective emotional experience. I'm going to become a figure in his life that he trusts, that he knows won't judge him. What I'm hoping to do over time is lead him towards his emotional experiences. He's gone through so much trauma in his life, and I do want to make sure he's in a stable, grounded place where we get into the trauma, but none of that is really going to happen until he can trust me. So for what it's worth, in at least these scenes, the therapy scenes that we go through, Arthur seems pretty grounded. He seems pretty with it. There are certainly films and scenes that going through the movie where he doesn't seem with it at all. He seems like he's dissociating or out of it. But while he's in therapy, he seems pretty here and now, which is a great place to start. All right, let's start with the first therapy scene and get into it. So the scene starts out with Arthur in one of his laughing episodes, and the therapist chooses to sit quietly and wait for that to end. And I don't think that's a bad decision to make, and sometimes interrupting an episode like that might come across as judgy, especially if we know he is struggling to have control in those moments. But what you could do, and what I might want to ask is, I know you're laughing right now, but I'm wondering emotionally, what are you feeling behind the laughter? What I'm trying to do here is expand his awareness of what is the emotion he's actually feeling, even if he's stuck in one of these episodes. So the scene progresses from there, and when he finally stops laughing, he says, "Is it just me, or is it getting crazier out there?" The therapist's response to that is, "It is certainly tense. People are struggling, they're losing their jobs." And then she goes, "Did you bring your journal?" I would want to stop before going to something very directive like, "Did you bring your journal?" and validate his experience. Ask the really open question and say, "I can definitely see why you'd think that. It's getting crazier out there. What have you experienced, Arthur, that is crazy?" And just again, get curious about his experience and find out more. The next thing that happens in the scene is the therapist takes the journal and begins to go through it. I don't think this is a very good setup. What I would want to do is empower Arthur and invite him, "Is there anything you would like to read from your journal?" versus me taking it and thumbing through it, which sets up, again, a very big power differential, almost where I'm like the principal and you're turning in the homework. I don't think that's a great setup to empower him. But then you get this tension that occurs while Arthur is kind of pulling out the journal and saying, "Well, I'm kind of using it as a joke book. I think I told you that I want to get in a career of stand-up comedy." And the therapist responds, "No, you didn't tell me that." And then Arthur responds, "I think I did." This is a bad tension and wrestling match to get in when you're a therapist with a client. Even if you don't remember something, you would still want to get curious about their experience instead of arguing whether or not they said something or didn't. So in this situation, I would say like, "Oh yeah, so how's the stand-up comedy going for you?" Since you're using this as a joke book. Again, wanting to know more about his experience, validating his experience. Of course, if there's long-standing memory issues, you would want to address that at some point when you have a solid relationship and be like, "I'm sorry, Arthur, I don't think this is something you've ever brought up." But most of the time in therapy, you don't want to get in that kind of wrestling match with the client because it's going to feel invalidating for the client. The next part that the therapist does is probably the part I like the best. She asks this great question, and says, "What's it feel like for you to come in here? Does it help to have someone to talk to?" This is an awesome question to understand Arthur's experience in the here and now and how he's relating with you, especially if we're wanting him to build trust and learn how to form solid, healthy relationships with other people. These questions will be essential. Arthur responds in kind of a sad, more down way. "I think I felt better when I was locked up in the hospital." Wow, there's so many directions you could go from here, and I don't really like the direction the therapist goes. The therapist asks the question, "Have you thought more about why you were locked up?" It is important to know why he's locked up, and it's important for him to reflect on that at some point, but I would rather come alongside in that moment and ask the question, what felt better for you, Arthur, about being locked up? Again, getting really curious about his experience and showing him that you're interested. Next, Arthur responds to the question, "Have you thought more about why you're locked up?" very hopelessly. He goes, "Who knows?" And then it seems like the therapist checks out a bit. She starts writing notes right in front of him, and Arthur desperately asks the next question. He asks, "Can you ask the doctor to increase my medication?" The therapist responds in a way that didn't feel right at all. It felt very invalidating. She goes, "Arthur, you're on 7 different medications. Surely one of them has to be helping." What I would want to respond is ask him, "Arthur, what are you hoping to get relief from?" This will allow me to better understand his suffering and distress in this moment. And that's really pivotal for me being the best therapist I can for him. Arthur responds to the question of surely one of these medications has to be helping by saying, "I just don't want to feel so bad anymore." Wow, what a powerful response. And then the scene just ends right there. But as a therapist in the room, again, I'd want to follow up and say, "Arthur, what feels so bad for you?" Again, I'm trying to collect this information so I can be the best therapist for him, offer him different treatments, or know what direction to go in so he can experience this relief. Therapy scene 2 starts out with Arthur telling a story of a song he heard on the radio where they mention his clown name. And then the therapist jumps in and tries to interrupt and says, "Arthur, as a therapist, you almost never want to interrupt your client unless you're doing it intentionally and explain why you're doing it." And so if I was going to interrupt a client, I'd want to say, "I'm interrupting you right now because I'm worried the path we're going on isn't going to be helpful to your treatment," or "I'm interrupting you because we're almost out of time this session." But you'd want to be very intentional of why you're interrupting. But Arthur kind of ignores it and keeps going on. And he says, "Until a little while ago, it was like no one saw me. I didn't even know if I even existed." This would be something I'd want to follow up on right away and ask, what's it feel like for you to be noticed, Arthur? And I'd also want to ask at some point, the next question is, who are you connecting with? Because one of our goals is that Arthur starts to feel comfortable with himself and will connect with other people outside the therapy realm, forming closer relationships. The problem is he's starting to feel noticed for the wrong reasons, right? He murdered the 3 people on the train, and now people are painting themselves like clowns and dressing up like clowns as a part of rebellion and a movement. Maybe some of that might come out in therapy. Maybe Arthur would hold on to that. But in either case, we'd want to know, who are you beginning to connect with? Next, the therapist interrupts again, and what proceeds is what we'd call a therapeutic rupture. Arthur looks at the therapist and says, "You don't listen, do you? I don't think you hear me. You ask the same questions every week. How's your job? Do you have any negative thoughts? All I have are negative thoughts, but I do exist, and people are starting to notice." As a therapist, right away, I want to start repairing this, because if Arthur feels like I can't hear him or I'm not listening, he's likely not to come back, and he certainly isn't going to trust me and trust that I'm understanding his experience. So I'd want to ask the question right away, what is it like for me not to hear you? And I'd want to collect the information from what he says and think about how I can be a better therapist for him. Then the therapist drops the bomb that funding's been cut and treatment's going to be ending. As a therapist, if you ever have to deliver bad news or drop a bomb like this, the only place you want to do it is at the very beginning of a session. You don't want to wait for the session to start like this or it's somewhere else in the middle. The reason why is you want plenty of time to process the client's reactions and game plan what might be next. So the only thing I did really like, or at least appreciate, is the therapist's authenticity when she dropped the bomb. She said, they don't really care about people like you, Arthur, and they don't care about people like me either. You might not want to project again that people aren't caring about Arthur, because that's kind of moving away from what we're trying to set up and having him establish healthy relationships and connection. But I still really appreciate the authenticity of the therapist giving this news, because it allows the client to see you're a real person who has emotions and you're modeling a real emotional reaction. It might be better to name, I'm feeling really frustrated or sad or at a loss that we have to cut funding, but she was at least authentic, if nothing else. Arthur's response to this is, where am I supposed to get my medication? Who do I talk to? And the therapist simply says, I'm sorry. Of course, you would want to do your best to set up what services might be next for Arthur. He's not somebody who should be going without medication and without treatment. That would not be clinically indicated for him whatsoever. But the truth is, too often in social services or community agencies, that they are understaffed and they are low funded. So there was something about this portion of the movie that felt sort of real to me. Now, of course, they're painting it like all of Gotham is falling apart, all services are disappearing. That is something that I've really never heard of before, but I'm sure somewhere in some town that has happened. But as a minimum, we want Arthur to be connected to somebody getting continuous service. Because as you see, as the movie goes on, when he's no longer taking medication, he's no longer getting therapy, he only becomes worse and worse. So one other thing I might want to do as a therapist in this moment, if I had to abruptly terminate, is I might want to highlight Arthur's strengths. And the reason I might want to do this is if he's floating out there by himself for a little while before he gets connected to services, is I want him to know you do have strengths that you can lean on in this in-between time. Arthur's been able to hold down a job before. So he's able to find that job, get that job, work that job for a while until that unfortunate incident happened with the gun. But also Arthur has been able up to this point to take care of his mom. So there are certain strengths that he has that he can lean on. And as a therapist, I want to highlight these strengths. I don't always want to go right to deficits, right? Because if we only focus on deficits, it's hard to know for a client, what is it that I'm doing well? What is it that I can continue to do or bring back and do again? I would definitely want to do that in this situation if I had to prematurely terminate with Arthur. Ultimately, as the movie progresses, Arthur turns into the Joker, this super violent, aggressive, impulsive character. And it's really important to remember the Joker is a character. Why is that important to keep in our minds? Because we don't want to perpetuate mental health stereotypes. And one of the stereotypes people can take from this film is that people with mental disorders or mental difficulties are violent, aggressive people. Looking at the research, this is simply not the case. So again, making sure that you know within yourself, we don't perpetuate these stereotypes, and we can study the Joker and think the Joker is super fascinating and interesting, but know that the Joker isn't a great representation of other people out there in the world with mental health difficulties. I said at the beginning of this video that if you watch until the end, I'll point out something you might have missed in the movie. Well, there's a great scene in the movie after Arthur has attended the comedy club where he's seen writing in his journal, writing in his joke book, and there's a quote there that he had wrote down, and it says, "The worst part about having a mental illness is people expect you to behave like you don't." What a powerful quote about mental health and mental disorders. We go through this life and we look through our own lens and we project ourselves into almost everything that we see. But ultimately, using ourselves as a guide of how other people should be is a really poor template. We have to know people are out there struggling with things that we can't even imagine, that we've never experienced before. This is so important to keep in your mind and have this compassion for others when we're out there interacting with people in the world. It's a way that we can create more connection amongst our community and amongst each other. Hey, thanks so much for watching. I really hope this was interesting for you as we took all the different information from the movie to try to assess Arthur, come up with some provisional diagnosis, and then think about therapeutically how we might help him in the room. Please interact with me, comment down below. Let me know some diagnosis that maybe you came up with, or if you were in that therapeutic hot seat, what you might do. Thanks again for watching, and again, keep it locked right here for plenty more mental health videos to come.